Thank you, Gareth. And thanks again, everybody, for being here. If at any point I start holding this microphone too far away from me and you can't hear, just wave or yell or throw something. So introductions first. I think most folks in town know Karsten Hoyer. He's probably best known for his extraordinary leadership in bringing Yellowstone to Yukon to the attention of the world through his extraordinary walk from Yellowstone to Yukon. It was a long time ago. How long ago was that now?
98, 99.
98, 99. So a while back. Karsten also, he was, he actually crawled. He was very, very young at the time.
He wasn't alone either.
No, and he wasn't. And then for part of the journey, part of the necessary journey, Leanne Allison, who's filming tonight, was with him. And then they've gone on to do some amazing journeys together. The porcupine caribou herd journey, finding Farley, and I think raising Zeb is also an extraordinary journey. So thank you both very much for being here. Karsten did a term as president of Yellowstone to Yukon, and his current position right now is back with Parks Canada. He's part of the team that's reintroducing bison to Banff National Park. So he's gone from tackling one big hairy problem to another. Also with us tonight is Dr. Hilary Young. She hates it when I say that. Hilary works as Yellowstone to Yukon's Alberta Program Coordinator and has a PhD in ecology from the University of Calgary. Some of you in town may also know that Hilary is the co-owner of the Yoga Lounge. So later on tonight there'll be some OMS yoga sessions. As things get a little bit heated up as the evening goes on, we'll do some downward facing dogs and whatnot. Hilary did her PhD work here in the Bow Valley looking at ungulates, and also previously studied monkeys in Costa Rica, which also seems strangely fitting for our work here in the Bow Valley. And my name is Stephen Legault, and I've also been in the Bow Valley for a long time. I moved here in 1992 to work for Parks Canada up in Lake Louise as a park naturalist, and have been here pretty much ever since. Currently, my work is as a program director for the Crown of the Continent, Alberta and the Northwest Territories for Y2Y. But I had the privilege of being one of the founders of the organization way back in the 1990s. Again, like Karsten, I was in diapers at the time. And my job tonight is to give you sort of the big picture, to tell you a little bit about Yellowstone to Yukon and why Y2Y thinks the Bow Valley is so important. So Yellowstone to Yukon's vision is protecting and connecting habitat from Yellowstone to the Yukon so people and nature can thrive. And I really want to emphasize the fact that it's people and nature. We take the two parts of that mandate extremely seriously, because while protecting the ecology of this landscape is extremely important, this is our home. And for a lot of the people that we work with throughout the region, it has been their home for generations. And so we feel it's equally important to speak to them and the things that they feel are important as well. So who we are. We've been around now since officially as an organization since 1997, but as a loose collaborative of organizations really since about 1994. And our founding meeting was held just in Kananaskis country, just outside the Bow Valley. We're a charity in Canada and the United States, which makes for some very interesting paperwork. At present, we have 14 staff scattered throughout Montana, Idaho, British Columbia, Alberta. We've got 6 part-time contractors, a couple of strategic advisors, and 2, not 1, but 2 boards of directors, which makes also for some really interesting meetings. The way we get our work done is through collaboration with partners. And over the course of the last 20-some years, we've been privileged to work with more than 300 different organizations, not-for-profits, community groups, municipalities, government agencies, tribes, and First Nations. And really, this is the model by which work gets done in the conservation world these days, is by working in partnership and collaboration. And we're based in Canmore. Our office is in the building that houses the Toronto Dominion Bank. We're right above the Toronto Dominion Bank, right next to Safeway. There's 2 Starbucks within a very short walk, and J.K. Bakery just around the corner, and that keeps us going. What makes Yellowstone to Yukon unique? We're an organization that has a 100-year vision for success. Our vision is that in 100 years from now, our great-great-grandchildren will be able to look upon this landscape and see that it is connected and protected so that people and nature can thrive. And we don't think that that's going to happen overnight. We've been at it now for almost a quarter of a century. We've made tremendous progress in that time. Between our founding and today, we've increased the amount of protected land, working with those 300 partners, by about 20% or so. It's been an extraordinary journey during that time. We're transboundary collaboration. Much of our work happens across borders. And that creates a whole unique set of challenges, but it also creates amazing opportunities for learning and for cross-pollination between our efforts. We believe in supporting local conservation efforts to achieve big picture success. So we have this great big vision, but where that vision becomes reality is on the ground in communities throughout the entire region, much like here in the Bow Valley. And we're science-based, but we're passion-driven. So why Canmore for Y2Y? Well, Canmore is in fact the heart of the Yellowstone to Yukon region, and the Bow Valley is the heart of the Yellowstone to Yukon region. Back in the early days, a lot of our early founders lived here. Bart Robinson, for example, was our first coordinator and chose to live in the Bow Valley, and so that's where we set up shop. A bunch of us who were the early board members were based here in the Bow Valley or in Calgary, and so this is what this is what became home for us. But at the same time, the Bow Valley has also been the key to our success from day one. In many ways, the issue that we're discussing tonight is part of what helped us as an organization get started. Because it was the NRCB hearings in 1992 and the findings of those hearings that was one of the very first times where corridor ecology became an issue that helped make decisions for land use planning and land use policy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on. And then finally, it's the realization that if we can't find success here, if we can't have success here in the Bow Valley, where we have so many people so passionate about nature and about the outdoors, about wildlife, people who have made decisions in their lives to live here because of how extraordinary this place is. If we can't do it here, then how could we possibly imagine doing it anywhere else? And we're based here for the same reason you're all based here. It's because we love this place. Because in our time off, we hike and we mountain bike and we fish and we hunt and we go into the backcountry of Banff and Kananaskis, and this is where we've chosen to raise our families and to put down roots. So let's pull back the camera here from the Bow Valley just for a minute, and then we'll bring it right back down. The Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative is founded on the principles of conservation biology, on the notion that islands of wildlife, islands of protected areas, when surrounded by development and when cut off from one another, are not big enough to support those populations of wildlife anymore. And so if you look at the diagrams here, you'll see that, historically, there was a great diversity of wildlife throughout North America. And that as time has gone on, that diversity has dwindled and dwindled. And you can see that in the area outlined as Y2Y, we still have a considerable amount of diversity of wildlife, whereas throughout the rest of North America, that wildlife diversity, that diversity of life is quickly diminishing. One of the ways we learned this was by following the research on a wolf named Pluie. This goes way back, 25 years or more. Pluie was a radio-colored wolf who was a master traveler. She was a disperser, and she made a huge journey over the course of her life, traveling from Banff National Park up through the national parks, down all the way into Montana, across through Idaho, up into British Columbia, a huge loop that covered an area of 100,000 square kilometers in size. That's 10 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. And what we learned from Pluie and from her travels was that if we're going to protect wide-ranging species like wolves, wolverines, grizzly bears, aquatic species like west-slope cutthroat trout and bull trout, we need to think at the same scale as they live their lives. The Yellowstone to Yukon region, therefore, we chose a very ambitious scale to work at. 1.3 million square kilometers. It is one of the largest intact mountain ecosystems left on Earth. In this landscape, all of the major species that were here when David Thompson came tripping across, when Lewis and Clark came tripping across, are still here. Thanks to Carson and the work that Parks Canada is doing and other agencies are doing, soon bison will be restored back to the wild and not just in captivity in these landscapes. And people from around the world recognize that Yellowstone to Yukon is a model for achieving success at this scale, and that what we have here is one of the very best chances anywhere on Earth to protect really big wilderness. We also realize that we've got to think really big in order to achieve local success and vice versa. So the big picture only works when we have local successes, like what we're hoping to achieve here in the Bow Valley, what we've worked to achieve in many other landscapes throughout the Yellowstone to Yukon region over the last 25 years. And the Bow Valley, as it turns out, is one of a handful of key locations across the region where we know that we must achieve success in order to have success at the entire continental scale of Yellowstone to Yukon. Because if you look, we're the star in the peninsula of Yellowstone to Yukon. We're pretty much smack dab in the center of the region. And the Bow Valley is one of 4 locations across the entire region where we stand a chance of severing the connection between the entire region. I'll talk more about that here in a second. So again, we've learned from species like grizzly bears. You can see here that the map shows a historic range of grizzly bears, sort of in the light pinky color, all the way down to Mexico. Grizzly bears used to roam well out onto the prairie. They're a native prairie species. They used to get out as far as Lake Winnipeg and up into the Arctic. The little brown dots that you can see there are their range in 1922 when a census was done. So at that point, they were already starting to be isolated on small islands. And the red is their current range. Again, here we are here. That's where Canmore is in the Bow Valley. We're on that peninsula of land where grizzly bears still remain. 1922 to present day. So what's happened in the circle? You can see all of those islands have disappeared. And again, it's this theory of island biogeography. These islands can't sustain themselves unless they're connected with one another. They need to be connected for these species in order to survive because the genetic diversity that's present on those islands needs to be able to locate itself between those islands. Over the long term, if it doesn't, all kinds of things can happen. Inbreeding occurs. If a population comes under threat from a disease or pest, that can wipe out those local species. External threats like hunting or development can also take its toll. And so what we know is that islands, when isolated from other populations, wink out. And so development has created islands out of many of our core protected areas. Yellowstone is now an island. Other places like the Salmon Selway in the Yellowstone to Yukon region are also islands, where grizzly bears have gone completely extinct because they weren't connected with other populations. And you can see here the red line on the map is the Bow Valley and then over into Yoho National Park. And the question that's on the table right now is, are we creating a new island here in the Bow Valley and in Canmore? And so the Bow Valley really is a test of our commitment to how we get our work done throughout this continental scale effort. It's here that we're based, it's here that we were founded, it's here that we've got this extraordinary community of support for wildlife and for conservation. This, as Gareth mentioned, this conversation has been ongoing now for an extremely long time, since 1992, and in many ways even before that. But 1992 put the fine point on the conversation about whether or not we would be able to make decisions in the Bow Valley that would lead to the connection of the landscapes around the Bow Valley with one another, between Banff National Park and Kananaskis Country. Over the last 25 years, we've made this series of decisions, and the big question that we're facing right now is, as we come down to these final decisions about how wildlife will survive and how we can coexist with it in this landscape that we all call our home, whether or not these last decisions will be our best decisions, So the Bow Valley is really a test for our commitment. This is an aerial view of the Bow Valley taken from Google Earth. The green line is the corridor that we'd very much like to see happen on the south and southwest side of the Bow Valley. The red line there represents the distance from peak to peak. It's about 10 kilometers, peak to peak here in the Bow Valley. This red line represents the livable space in the Bow Valley. The landscape that's below about 20 or 25 degrees slope, places where we can hang out, and the places where wildlife hangs out. And that little green line is about half a kilometer. And so the decisions that we've made over and over again, over our time here in Canmore and the Bow Valley, have created a situation where this is now the conversation that we're having. Our last decisions about what will we do with these landscapes. It's not a lot of space. There wasn't a lot of space here to start with, and there's much less space today for wildlife to survive. There are a lot of threats to the connectivity that's present here in the Bow Valley and the importance of that connectivity. Obviously, we've got the highway and the railway, and as anybody who's been following the news this year knows, it's been a terrible year for bears being killed on the highway. About 11 bears now have been killed on the Trans-Canada Highway between the Banff Park Gate and where Highway 40 joins Highway 1. The railway also takes its toll on wildlife. Many of you know that there's an existing wildlife underpass at Dead Man's Flats that is currently in question as to whether or not it's going to continue to be effective. There's proposed development at the mouth of that underpass. There's a very difficult conversation happening right now between the province and between the Hamlet of Dead Man's Flats within the municipality of Bighorn. Town of Canmore and the Stoney First Nation have intervened in order to try and force a resolution to that issue, and we're all sort of waiting on pins and needles right now as to whether or not that underpass will remain viable. Of course, there's the proposed Smith Creek and Resort Center ASPs, the topic that's focused once again a bright light on this conversation, and there's also the possibility of additional development on the northeast side of the Bow Valley, in the Eagle Terrace and area. So again, just to get an overview, I mean, this is what the range of the Rockies looks like from above. You can see in yellow the principal wildlife movement corridors, and we've got this series of developments or challenges to connectivity that wildlife and ourselves as a community are now having to struggle with and face. And yet here we are, we live in this world-class town in a world-class region, a place where people from around the world come to visit, and a place where people from around the world look to us for leadership on large landscape conservation. So, you know, what does that mean? Living with wildlife, it has become part of our identity as a community. And it's why a lot of us came here. It's why I came here 25 years ago. It's why a lot of my friends who were born here have stayed. And it's about making room for wildlife to roam, as well as ensuring that we can continue to roam as a community. What does world-class mean? It's going to mean erring on the side of caution. It means that we use the precautionary principle to make our decisions. Because as I said, we're making some of the very last decisions we're going to make about development in the Bow Valley. And so it's beholden upon ourselves as a community to make sure that we err on the side of caution while making those decisions. And it's about exercising restraint. It's about recognizing that we can always make a decision some other time to build something. But once it's built, it's impossible to reverse that decision. And it's about making our last decisions our best. So I'm going to end there and let Carson come up